Good afternoon, folks. Thank you so much for joining me. We'll give folks just another moment here to join, and then I want to go ahead and let's get started. Let's jump on in with why we confuse practice with performance. So I think it's something that we do a lot, but I want to start this off with something that I learned this week. I learned a new word this week. I've probably heard it before, but it really kind of got in my brain this week, and it's a fabulous word. Pareidolia, pareidolia. And pareidolia is what happens when your brain finds something meaningful in ambiguous patterns. It's why we see faces in clouds. It's why you can look at the front of a car and it might look like it's smiling at you, or it might look like it has an angry face. So you're projecting that face onto the front of the car. And it's why a knot in a piece of wood can look like an eye or a chin or a full face. Uh, and there's also something called auditory pareidolia. And that is when your brain hears a meaningful sound inside something that is random or indistinct. And this really stuck with me because it explains something that's happened to me for years. Sometimes when a fan is running at night, I'll hear I'll hear singing kind of in the distance, and not actual singing. I know there's not a choir gathered somewhere just outside my window, and I can't really hear clear lyrics. There are no clear lyrics. It's more like a very distant music, a melody that I know exists somewhere off in the distance, something just beyond the edge of my understanding. And then if I turn off the fan, that stops. If I change the fan speed, the music changes. So the tone and everything will change. And what's happening there is that my brain is taking the random frequencies inside that sound, and it's searching for a pattern, for something that makes sense. It's looking for meaning. And when I learned that there was a word for this, I got really fascinated by it because, and I realized this already from studying a lot of neuroscience and neurobiology, but it really goes to prove that our brains are not passive recording devices. They're not simply receiving the world exactly as it is. They are interpreting, they are predicting, and they are comparing what's happening right now with everything that we've encountered before. And then our brain fills in the gaps. It searches for relationships, and it tries to turn noise into meaning. And as I read about pareidolia, I really started to make the connection with how creativity works, because creativity works in very much the same way. I mean, maybe we don't create because we begin with a perfectly formed idea. And I think we very rarely do have that perfectly formed idea. I think we create because we're willing to stay with something incomplete long enough for meaning to emerge. We can hear strange sounds. It might be a stained wall. We'll talk a little bit more about Da Vinci. A rough sketch, a sentence that just doesn't quite know where it's going, a lump of clay, a problem that we don't even know how to articulate completely yet, much less actually be able to solve. And it might just be a life that doesn't yet make sense to us. But creativity is not really the ability to invent something out of nothing. It's the ability to remain present and engaged long enough to notice what something might be and what it might become. And that does bring us to what I really wanted to talk about today, because I really do not think that most of us, I don't think we dislike practice, and I don't think we're afraid of practice. I think we are afraid of being seen practicing. We're afraid of being seen before we know what we're really doing, before we have certified and stamped that the work is good, before we've worked the idea into clarity, before the 10th draft when the sentence actually works, before the paint dries, before we've answered uh, for the person who asks us, what is this supposed to be? So we're already trying to define what it's supposed to be before experimentation. And because we're afraid of being seen practicing, we start performing way too early. So we evaluate a piece before we've finished a sketch. We worry about publishing before we write a single chapter. We imagine the audience before we've learned the craft. And we evaluate maybe our business plan before it's even had time to be fleshed out and become a real business. We decide whether we are talented, that word annoys me, talented, before we have done enough work to even know what we're capable of. And we ask the rough work to do the work of the finished product. And then we get surprised when we become stuck. So the first thing I want to talk about is the imaginary audience here, because I do want to make it clear that performance, in and of itself, performance is not bad. And I want to make sure that we're really clear about that. Performance is necessary. Performance has a purpose. Eventually that curtain will open. The book is hopefully going to publish. The painting leaves the studio. Someone teaches the class you've been developing. You give the speech. You open the business. You submit the proposal. You show another person what you have made. And performance gives work a form that other people can encounter and respond to. The problem is not performance. The problem is when we allow the logic of performance to enter the practice room far too early. Because practice and performance ask very, very different questions. Practice are all going to be questions of possibility. Practice are questions around, what is this becoming? What might this be? Whereas performance is all about evaluation. It's going to be, is this good or is this good enough? Practice is experimentation. What if I try this? What if I tweak this? What if I change this? Performance, again, all about evaluation. Will people understand this? Will they engage with it? Practice is, what am I discovering? What am I finding? It's centered in curiosity. Whereas performance is, again, that how will this be received by others? And those are both really useful sets of questions, but they cannot lead the process at the same time. Curiosity whispers, evaluation interrupts. The moment that we start to imagine the audience, part of that attention leaves the work. And we stop asking what the work needs and we start asking those evaluation questions. What will people think? Are they gonna like this? Are they gonna understand it? Will it sell? Is anybody gonna watch this? Is anybody gonna care? Does it make me look competent? And of course, the flip side of that, that everyone is always terrified of, does it make me foolish? Could this become viable content? Should I post it? How many likes will it get? Is it on brand for me? So, what we do is before the idea has even learned to walk, we're asking it to do pirouettes at center stage and draw a crowd. And the audience does not have to be physically present to interrupt us. I think that's an important acknowledgement. We carry an imaginary audience with us everywhere, or at least we certainly can. We can carry it into the studio. We can carry it into the kitchen. We can carry it into the journal that no one else has ever been invited to read, and frankly, likely never will be, and we'll still be judgy about it. We can carry it into the very earliest stages of a new idea, and we can sit completely alone and still feel watched and evaluated. It's that imaginary audience that is frankly a terrible collaborator because it just arrives too early. It has opinions before there's anything to have a real opinion about. And it wants clarity on things while we're still exploring and experimenting. It wants confidence while we're still learning and making complete fools of ourselves. And making a complete fool of yourself can be quite freeing. It wants a finished story and a complete arc before we've even lived through the beginning. And when that audience arrives too early, practice starts to feel like failure. We start seeing things through those evaluation eyes. A rough draft, bad book. A rehearsal, terrible performance. A sketch, oh my gosh, I have no talent. This is a horrible painting. Being a beginner or even practicing as an expert feels like evidence that we are not meant to do the thing at all. But a rehearsal is not a failed performance. It's a successful rehearsal. A first draft is not a failed published book. It's a first draft doing exactly what a first draft is supposed to do. It might be a 10th, 15th, 20th, 50th draft by the time that actual book or paper comes out. A sketch is not an inadequate painting. It's a place to think with your hands, to learn that muscle memory and to work through shapes. And we get in trouble when we demand that every stage of the process justify itself according to the standards of the final stage. Every masterpiece, at some point, or at least every master, spent some time doing work that looked like a mistake. Every skilled person spent some time being awkward, and they probably will again. Every confident speaker once had to stand somewhere with a dry mouth and shaking hands. I myself puked backstage before going out once, so it happens. Um, every writer has written sentences that will live in the waste paper basket. Every artist has made something that was technically an object, uh, but not a particularly beautiful one. That is not evidence against the process. That is the process. So I'm very lucky. I have a pretty significant theater background, and theater taught me something useful pretty early about all of this. A script is not a cage, it's a score. You learn the structure so thoroughly that eventually you can be free inside of it. But you do not walk into that table reading or first rehearsal expecting opening night timing. Actors stop, they lose their place, they ask questions. Somebody enters from completely the wrong side of stage. A prop is missing, the wrong prop is in its place. A line that was supposed to punch the audience in the gut just falls flat. The director changes something, changes it back, changes it again, then maybe sits down, has a little convo with the actors, and then changes it again. That is not a breakdown in the creative process. Again, that is the creative process just being visible. Practice is messy because discovery is messy. It's not simply the repetition of something we already know. Practice is where we find out what we know and where we can learn new things. So let's talk consumption, practice, and performance, because this is something that I've been thinking about uh, a lot lately. And as I kept getting into this, I realized that there is another distinction that we need to make. So it's not just the distinction between practice and performance that we really are here to discuss, but there's really, at least kind of in my head, there may be three different modes: practice, performance, and consumption. Consumption says, give me the next thing. Okay, now give me the thing. I'm done with that thing. Give me the next thing. Okay, give me the next thing. Practice says, let me remain with this. Let me stay. And then performance, of course, says, let me shape this thing and finalize it so that another person can encounter it. And three, all three have a place in a creative life. We need things to consume. We need books. We need teachers. We need music and films and conversations and art and stories. And we definitely need ideas from outside of ourselves and outside of our perspectives. Creativity cannot happen in a vacuum, but that input, that consumption, is not the same thing as nourishment. Stimulation is not the same thing as inspiration. Inspiration isn't just what enters the mind. It's what the mind then has time to sit with and transform. We can consume enormous amounts of material and remain creatively undernourished. We can watch other people paint for hours, but never put a paintbrush actually to a canvas ourselves. We can listen to conversations about writing and never actually write anything down ourselves. We can collect ideas and tools and supplies and tutorials and inspirational quotes. And because we are engaged with the material that's related to creativity, we can feel as though we are creating. But consumption and creation are not the same transaction. Consumption can support practice, but it can't replace it. It can support it though. It is just important to recognize that at some point, we've got to stop receiving finished things from other people and sit down with something that is not yet begun, or at least not yet finished. And that can feel really uncomfortable because the thing in front of us does not entertain us. It does not arrive edited. It does not immediately tell us what it means or what it wants to do or what it wants to become. And it doesn't reward us every few seconds with a little dopamine burst. It just sits there. It's a blank page. It's a silent instrument. It's a piece of clay, an unresolved question, an idea that doesn't even really have a title yet, or a piece of paper that just has the pure audacity to remain blank, even though we've been looking at it for several minutes now. Practice is what places us in relationship with something that will not complete itself and it will not entertain us. We have to participate. Let's talk briefly about the shower tile. I know, weird title for a section, right? I've spent an unreasonable amount of time seeing things in the tile in my shower. It's this blue, brown, it's really pretty tile. And man, I will see entire landscapes, animals, faces, mountain ranges. Sometimes there's this like really big creature with horns and floppy ears who looks vaguely like Ludo from the Labyrinth. And sometimes there's like an entire medieval kingdom that's developing right beside the shampoo bottles. Obviously, those things are not literally there in the tile. They're not there. Um, but they're not totally random either. They are, as we began this whole conversation with, they emerge from a conversation between the pattern in the tile and everything my imagination, that my brain knows how to recognize. The tile supplies texture and color and shape. I supply sight. The tile is not changing every 3 seconds. I'm not scrolling through. It does not become concerned that I may have lost interest. It's not gonna send me a notification. It doesn't begin playing music suddenly. And it certainly doesn't come with a caption that explains what I am supposed to be seeing. It is ambiguous. And because it remains ambiguous, my mind has somewhere to go. That's one of the gifts of ambiguity. It gives people participation. It gives people permission to participate, was what I was trying to say. Uh, because it's leaving part of the experience unfinished. And the unfinished portion is where our imagination gets a chance to come in. That's where we get to fill in those blanks. Come to find out, Leonardo da Vinci reportedly encouraged artists to look at stained walls, clouds, mud, and ashes. That was one of his big advices to budding artists. And it wasn't because the stains themselves were finished art. It was because if you looked long enough, forms, just as we discussed just now, start to emerge. Fantastic creatures, battles, landscapes, faces. And Da Vinci understood that attention could become a powerful creative tool. He did not need a different wall or a better wall or something to scroll through to change his perspective. He just needed to stay and look longer. And I love that because we often think creativity belongs to the person with the most original idea. But I think it also belongs to the person who can stay with an ordinary thing long enough to see what other people miss. What if those masterpieces were not just inside of Da Vinci? What if part of it was inside his attention, his focus, his ability to stay with something for a while? I think creation begins way before the actual making. It starts with noticing. And that's why I want to talk some about the performance machine. Because I think there is another reason this has all become difficult. We live in what I've started thinking of as the performance machine every day coming at us. Finished products, the photograph that was selected out of 150 that were taken, the paragraph that survived 2 months of editing, the song after it was mixed and remixed, the business after it was successful, the room after the renovation, the person after the body transformation, the competent speaker after 20 years of practice and experience. But what we don't see, or at least we rarely see, is the practice, the repetitions, the abandoned drafts, the drawings that didn't work, those awkward rehearsals, those really embarrassing first attempts. And then those long stretches where nothing really happened. We are consuming conclusions all day long. And then we sit down in front of our own beginnings and we wonder why they feel inadequate. We compare the private beginnings of our work with the public endings of somebody else's. That is an unfair comparison. It's an impossible comparison. And the problem is not just with that comparison. I think it's that to some degree, the mediums that we exist in every day train us to jump ahead, judge, react, continue. The next thing is already here. You're already late for it. You're already behind the times. Oh, the next thing is here, and the next thing, and the next thing, before our own response has even fully formed to the first thing, something else arrives to replace it. Um, and I was looking through, I was doing some reading the other day, and I found a recent study used the contemporary phrase brain rot to describe the cognitive fatigue and mental exhaustion that is associated with digital engagement. I do want to be careful about that term, that language, because it does not mean that the brain is literally rotting. It's not rotting. Rot makes it sound like you can never come back from it, and that's just not the case. The study also doesn't really prove that watching a few videos causes depression and lack of attention. Uh, it was a self-reported study conducted at one point in time, largely with young adults. I believe most of the participants were around 22. So you can't demonstrate a causal chain unfolding over time. What the researchers found is, as is often the case with research, was a lot more nuanced than that. And you're seeing my nerd hat come out here. So their statistical model, the digital cognitive fatigue did not directly predict depression, but instead it appeared to participate in what they described as a loss spiral. Cognitive exhaustion was associated with burnout. We know burnout. Burnout was associated with greater stress and anxiety. And then those states were further associated with depressive symptoms. And again, not proof that one thing causes the other, but man, did I think it raised some important creative questions. What happens when we constantly take in more material than we can metabolize? What happens when each new thing displaces the previous thing before it's become memory, association, or thought? What is happening when our attention is activated all day, every day, but rarely allowed to deepen beyond the surface? I don't think the cost is just lost time. I think part of the cost is lost creative capacity, because practice requires cognitive resources. It requires enough attention to notice subtlety and engage with subtlety and ambiguity. It needs enough patience to repeat something that's not good yet. And it needs enough emotional regulation to survive frustration. It also needs enough curiosity to resist declaring the experiment a failure prematurely, and enough interior quiet to allow yourself to hear an idea before the world tells you what it should become. You can't make a home for an idea from whatever scraps of attention happen to be left behind. Uh, and this isn't like an argument that technology is is evil. I use technology every day. I love technology. I'm talking to you through technology right now. It's, it allows artists, teachers, writers, small businesses to reach people and to work at a scale that they simply never could have before. So, this is not an argument against technology or an argument for purity. This is an argument for digestion. Digestion. Take things in, then stop. Let them encounter your memories, your experiences, your questions, your contradictions, your very unique way of perceiving. Let the material lose the voice it arrived with. Let it become strange again, and then let it become yours. A creative practice is partly the art of giving experience enough time to become thought. So let's talk a little bit more about less glare. Less glare. I know these little section titles. I came across, and this is from another idea I came across this week that I thought related beautifully to everything else we've talked about. I was reading an article about outdoor lighting and dark sky preservation. And the article explained that brighter light does not always make an area safer or easier to see. Past a certain point, an overly bright and unshielded light creates glare. So what happens is that your eyes adjust to the source of light instead of the thing you're actually trying to see. You get harsh shadows, your vision is less clear and less effective. And the problem there is not a lack of light. The problem is too much badly, poorly directed light. That's kind of a cool metaphor, right? Because sometimes it's not really about more illumination. Sometimes it's about less glare. The purpose of light is not brightness. The purpose of light is supporting vision, it's seeing. The purpose of information is not accumulation. The purpose of information is understanding. The purpose of feedback is not about more volume and more data points. The purpose of feedback is improvement. The purpose of practice is not constant productivity. The purpose of practice is to enhance and sharpen our own perceptions. We live in a culture that often assumes the answer is more and faster, more information, more content. I need more advice. I need more visibility. I need more metrics, more data points, more things I can analyze, more explanations, more certainty, more productivity. But the greatest obstacle to seeing is not always darkness. Sometimes it's excess, more notifications, more opinions, more advice, inviting more comparison, bringing in more analytics, which we are personally obsessed with, more commentary, everyone always trying to be brighter than everyone else. That's glare. And glare has a really fascinating property. It draws your eye away from the thing you're actually trying to see. And I think that that's the same thing that skipping too quickly to performance does. You stop experiencing the work. You stop really looking at the work and you start instead looking towards the audience. You're not listening for ideas or what is possible. You're listening for applause. And you stop asking what is emerging, and instead, immediately you start asking whether it's impressive or not. And I don't think we necessarily need another technique. Sometimes we need to remove whatever is preventing us from seeing what is already there. So let's talk a little bit about protecting the practice room. So what do we do with all of this? This is the okay, great. What do we do? I don't think the answer is just become more disciplined, which is not a huge surprise coming from me. Discipline matters. It matters. But I think that when people struggle to practice, one of the first things that we go to, we often make it a character problem. You need more willpower. You need a better routine. You just need to want it more. Maybe. I mean, maybe those are the answers. But I honestly think that we should be asking some more curious questions. What conditions would make practice possible? What needs to become quieter so that I can focus on this? What needs to be slower? What needs to remain private for now? What must I stop asking this unfinished thing to prove? And I look at it as a creative life needs different rooms. There has to be a room for performance, a room for publishing, for teaching, for showing, for selling, for deadlines and standards and processes. That is an important room. But there also needs to be a room with no audience in it at all. A room with stains on the wall, a room for strange melodies in fans, a room for fragments and pieces and questions, experiments, repetitions, curiosity, objects that don't have names or purposes. All the work that may never be shown to anyone. And that's the practice room. Its purpose is not to produce something impressive every time you enter. The purpose is to preserve your ability to stay curious and to discover. Private work is not wasted work. Private work is where you develop your taste, your voice, your expression. It's where instinct and your gut become real and legible. It's where we encounter our own thoughts before they are shaped by anticipated reaction. Some work needs to be protected from an audience before it becomes strong enough to meet one. And protecting practice may mean protecting more than time. It can mean protecting intervals. And what do I mean by that? Well, I mean the interval between seeing and judging, the interval between receiving information and responding, the interval between when we begin and when we show something, the interval in which an idea or influence actually becomes a product, the interval in which an idea becomes practice, the interval in which that practice becomes worth performing. Nothing impressive is likely to appear to be happening in those intervals, but that doesn't mean that nothing is happening. Roots look inactive from above ground. Bread is rising while it is apparently sitting completely still on your counter. The mind continues making associations when we stop demanding that it visibly produce. Transformation is much quieter than acquisition. Our feeds, particularly social media, makes acquisition look very visible. It makes it very visible. You get another opinion, you get another image, you get another reference, another factoid. Practice is what makes transformation possible. And that means you got to give yourself permission to be a beginner. And that is a real problem. It's the beginner problem. We say we want to learn something new, but we don't want to experience what it is to be new at something, particularly adults. I'm speaking to the adults in the room here. Kids are very free and tend to be open with that, and good for you guys. But once you grow up, we do not want to experience being new at things. We want beginner access with the advanced competence right off the bat. And we want to skip the stage when our hands don't really know what our minds are asking them to do. But being a beginner is a critical location in the process. You cannot become experienced without passing through inexperience. You can't become confident without surviving uncertainty and probably a little embarrassment. You can't find your voice without making sounds that don't sound a thing like you. And then again, are probably a little embarrassing. Confidence, I think, is really often misunderstood. We think confidence arrives before we begin. But confidence is the memory of having begun and survived. Practice is what gives us that memory. It gives us evidence, empirical evidence, not evidence that we're not going to fail, but evidence that failure is entirely and completely survivable. It provides us evidence that the frustration will pass and that the confusion can transform into familiarity. Gives us evidence that we can remain in the room and present even when the work is not rewarding us immediately. The goal of practice is not necessarily confidence. Sometimes the goal is really more about familiarity with uncertainty. The creative life, I really think, belongs in part to people who can remain in ambiguity a little longer than most and long enough to start to make meaning. People who resist replacing an experience before it's totally revealed itself, or who can let the moment after I don't know continue. Because I don't know really shouldn't be the end of the thought. I don't know is the threshold of discovery. So let's, in closing, jump our way back to the fan, to that strange, distant choir hidden inside random noise. We know that the singing is not literally there, but something is happening. The brain is searching, listening, comparing. It's trying to find order. It's trying to find beauty. It's trying desperately to create meaning. And practice is a lot like that. Practice is giving yourself enough quiet to hear those songs hidden inside the noise. It's enough time to see the landscape or the face that's in the stain, enough patience to find the form in clay, and enough focus and privacy and grace to write the sentence before asking if anyone wants to read it. It's enough courage to remain with the unfinished. Now, the world is going to continue to invite you to move faster. You're going to get another notification. There's going to be another pop up headline. There's going to be another video and another video and another video, and opinions on opinions and opinions. There will be another thing to consume, another opportunity to evaluate ourselves through the imagined eyes of strangers. I want you to remember that somewhere there will also be a stained wall, a blank page, an unfinished melody, a question without an answer, a conversation that needs your full and complete attention, a piece of work that's not ready to be seen yet. Stay with it, not because staying is the easiest thing or the most comfortable thing, and not because everything we make will become something extraordinary. Definitely not because practice guarantees applause. Stay with it because meaning rarely arrives at the speed of distraction. Stay because the unfinished thing cannot tell you what is becoming if you keep demanding that it perform. Stay because attention is how we enter into a deeper and more meaningful relationship with the world. Stay because some possibilities only become visible after everyone else would have looked away. Practice is not the place where we prove that we are already good. Practice is where we become capable of seeing more. Practice is where attention becomes perception, where perception becomes meaning, and where meaning, often slowly, finds form. Don't ask your unfinished work to perform. Ask it to keep becoming. And then stay with it long enough to see what happens. That's my challenge. Have a wonderful week. I would love to see you at serendipitysellers.com. And I will be back next month for another conversation. But I hope you have a wonderful day. Hope this gives you some stuff to think about. And in the comments, I would love to hear some of your experiences with really focusing and practicing uh, perception and ensuring that you don't jump too quickly to performance. Thank you all so much, and I will see you next time.